Why, hello everyone, welcome back. I've got a bit of a confession to make. I have played a lot of Dune Awakening. It's been a bit of an obsession of mine over these past few weeks. And let me just say, this is going to be an interesting video because one, I had a blast, but two, I'm also very, very torn. This is simultaneously one of the most immersive open world survival games I've ever played, just knocking the atmosphere and sound design out of the park with all of these cool as hell dynamic events. You got sandstorms rolling in and engulfing the terrain, ships getting blasted in the atmosphere before crashing down onto the planet, massive worms erupting from the dunes and thundering towards you like a freight train, all with this sick soundtrack in the background that dynamically changes based on what's occurring. Then there's the open world, which is huge, fully seamless with zero loading screens or fast travel, which has made it very engrossing and immersive for me personally. You got points of interest in every direction to explore, all sorts of strongholds, camps, and dungeons full of enemies and secrets. And then there are the other players running around, as barring a few story-specific areas, there are no instances, so you're gonna bump into other people fairly frequently, which makes the space feel that much more alive. All of that stuff I have really enjoyed. It's been a lot of fun exploring and being immersed in this world. However, at the very same time, Dune has a lot of glaring issues, many of which I think is gonna be a deal breaker for some people. So beyond the occasional performance hiccups, most notably for me during the Sandstorm events, there's also been quite a lot of bugs for a title that was originally supposed to release in just a few weeks. I'm talking T-posing characters, the fact that I was straight up invisible to one of my friends and party members for well over an hour. We had textures vanishing on everything, making the game look like a PS1 title. There was some clipping through the terrain, and some things that just didn't function properly, like looting on several occasions. All of this we experienced personally, and is likely a big part of the reason for the fact that the game's release date got pushed back by a few weeks. And then there's the combat, which is not great, frankly. Melee in particular feels very lackluster with little to no impact to it. And once you get to the shielded enemies, you are basically forced to melee on a regular basis. The shooting, I would say, is serviceable as far as third-person shooters go, but also nothing to write home about. I'd basically say it's decent enough, but not great. Now, with all of that said, if put on a scale, the weightings of what I like versus what I dislike, I am personally leaning positive. Quite a bit, honestly. Like, I've been obsessed with this game over the course of the preview event because what it does well, I personally really enjoy. I played non-stop for days on end, foregoing sleep multiple nights in a row just to keep on playing, and I loved it. And part of it actually reminds me a lot of my first few weeks of playing the original Division game, just being super engrossed in this world and wanting to spend every waking minute in it. Dune Awakening has had me hooked in much the same way, its numerous issues aside. Now, if all of this sounds a bit confusing to you, don't worry, I'm not surprised. In fact, I am fully expecting this game is going to be quite divisive when it launches. I think there will be a lot of people like me who get obsessed with it, but there will also be many others who think it's straight up garbage. That's my prediction, honestly. And definitely, I would say it's true. Like, if you don't like survival games, this isn't going to be for you. The Dune setting alone, even for as well as they do the immersive world, which they do well, I don't think that's enough of a distraction from the core loop of the game and the genre. However, if you do like survival games and are used to the typical jank associated with them, I think this is one of the better versions of that experience, especially the fact that it takes place in this massive, seamless, immersive open world that I've really, really loved. And I know that sounds contradictory, saying that this is one of the better versions while still being very janky and buggy, but I would say it's one of the better versions of that typically janky and buggy experience, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, so let's dive into the game. As usual, what I'm gonna do is give you a basic overview of all of the core elements and systems, the gameplay loop, the various features, the things that you're gonna be doing in a typical play session, and then we'll wrap it up with my thoughts, both the good and the bad. Before we do though, it is time to talk about today's sponsor. What a segue. Today's video is sponsored by Holzkern, the watch and accessories company based out of Austria who makes some rather unique stuff. You probably have seen me wearing these watches in various videos videos over the years because I genuinely enjoy them. I like how they're designed, I like the high quality, and I like the fact that they use less than common materials, including various gemstones, woods, pearls, and even stones. For example, the watch I got recently, beyond being made of black stainless steel, includes a fine-grained burlwood dial and a strap with maple wood links and sapphire crystal. There's a huge variety of styles and products available. I've got several watches myself. As mentioned, it's all crafted with natural materials, making each unique and high quality. They manufacture in small quantities to ensure responsible production. Every product also comes with a 2-year guarantee, and they offer free worldwide express shipping, covering custom fees with purchases typically arriving in 2 to 5 business days. Also, they make products for both men and women. In fact, they've got a big Mother's Day sale underway. Whether you want to pick up something for yourself or for mom, now is a great time. Using my link in the description below, along with the code FORCE at checkout, will get you 15% off any purchases on the entire site. All right, now before we dive into the details and all the nitty-gritty specifics, I want to let you know exactly what we got to play. So this preview was held over the course of a period of 2 weeks, and it consisted of the following content. We had access to 3 out of the 12 zones in the initial map of Haga Basin. Those zones being Haga Basin South, along with both the eastern and western Vermilius Gap. Now in those spaces, we had full reign to explore all of the associated points of interest, the camps, the caves, the strongholds, the dungeons, all the while killing enemies, collecting loot, and gathering resources to do the whole survival thing. There was also all of the dynamic events, the weather stuff was working, the worms would regularly bust through the sand and start chasing players around, and we had the crash ships happening on a regular basis. Basically, the first 3 zones out of the 12 zones that are going to consist of all of Haga Basin, those were fully fleshed out, and we had all the content and features within it to experience. And this amounts to what the developer estimates as being the first roughly 20 to 25 hours of gameplay. I personally spent well over 40 in this space, but I kind of overdid it. And it also represents what they would consider the early to the early mid-game experience. We got to see most of the first act of the game's story of the 2 that they plan to have once it releases, and we had access to the first few tiers of crafting progression. This works as it does in other survival games, where you basically move up the ranks of resource tiers with new zones introducing new resources that let you make more powerful stuff, and you progress that way all the way up until the final tier that you get access to at the end game. Okay, so that is the scope of what we played. Now let's talk about the details. Character creation is the very first thing. This actually does seem quite robust, although personally I don't really care. I just selected one of the presets, was happy enough with that, and jumped straight in. Now after deciding how you look, you do have a couple of impactful choices to make, selecting your background information, as well as who your mentor was, and that mentor choice is what determines your beginning skill tree and the initially unlocked abilities that you have. Now the game does work in a way that as you play, you're going to come across the other class trainers, and you can learn their abilities, eventually having access to every single skill tree from every single class. But at the very beginning, you are going to be limited to your first choice, so you're going to want to pick accordingly. Those choices are the Swordmaster, who starts with a knee charge, where you rush towards an enemy and strike them. The Bene Gesserit starts with Voice Compel, which pulls enemies towards you. The Mentat begins with a turret called the Sentinel, and finally the Trooper starts with the Shigawire Cable, which is essentially a grapple hook. Now personally, I found the Shigawire Cable way too good to pass up, especially with the extra mobility that it grants you, the fact that you can quickly and easily traverse the environment. Although that said, the very first trading post that you come across in the game after the first couple of hours, it does have a Trooper trainer inside, which means you could likely pick another starting class while still unlocking the Trooper skill tree and the grappling hook fairly early on. Gonna test that myself in the upcoming beta. Okay, so you make your character, you picked your starting skill tree, you were then dumped into the tutorial. This begins with you waking up in a cave and being introduced to all of the basics of the game's movement, combat, the early crafting, the gathering, and the survival systems. Now after that introduction, you are dumped somewhere within southern Haga Basin, which is the very first zone in Haga Basin, and this acts as basically an extension of the tutorial, with the main story quest guiding you through more of the game's fundamental systems. So first you are asked to gather resources to make some initial useful items, which include a set of armor, your very first ranged weapon, the Mala pistol, as well as a respawn beacon for when you die. They then direct you to your first of many different points of interest that are in the game by initially asking you to locate and clear a scavenger camp. These are found all over the place in every single zone, these tiny little camps with a handful of enemies, some loot, and some resources around. So you make a pair of binoculars, you scout out any of the camps that are nearby your starting location, and then you go there, you clear the enemies, you collect the loot. At this point, you have probably unlocked your first skill point, and you're going to spend it to learn any new active or passive ability in whichever class that you started with. Again, you're going to have 3 skill trees, and you can progress down them however you like. After this, they introduce you to base building, having you make a construction tool, which along with some resources, you will place a sub-fief, and this functions as your available building space in which you can make your starting base, placing foundation, walls, ceilings, and that is that. Then inside of the base, you're asked to place your first few crafting stations, which include a storage container, fuel power generator, and a blood purifier used for hydration. Following this, you are directed to your first trial, and this makes up a bulk of what is the game's narrative element that we have seen thus far. Here you're presented with a cutscene, and these are tied to these like spice-induced hallucinations in which you have to make your way through some sort of a challenge or puzzle. Now, I'm only going to show and talk about the first one of these to avoid any spoilers. Basically, you're transported into this like otherworldly dimension where you listen to some dialogue and then have to make your way through a maze, avoiding the gaze of these massive eyeballs. Now, subsequent trials are similar to this in the fact that they take place in these dreamlike spaces, but they are different in terms of the objectives and tasks that you have to complete, i.e. you are not forever hiding from these eyeballs. It's just in this first trial. I won't say any more though, because I don't want to spoil what very little narrative this game seems to have. Again, it's a survival game, MMO light open world title with a big PvP focus, which we haven't got to see yet. But the narrative stuff is kind of like window dressing, if anything. So you complete the trial, you head back into the real world, and then you continue your progression. Next, you're asked to make a still suit, which lets you carry more water and have better hydration management. You make a fabricator, which is your all-around crafting bench. This is where you're going to make pretty much everything from your gear to your weapons, your tools, your consumables, and even your vehicles. After that, you're going to construct a refinery for turning copper ore into usable ingots. Then you use those ingots to create a survey probe launcher, which you will take to some nearby high spot, firing it off, revealing the entire zone that you're in, which initially is that Haga Basin South, and this marks every single point of interest in the zone. After that, now that the entire zone is visible to you, you are then asked to head to Griffin's Reach trade post, and this is where the game really opens up. Now, everything that I just described makes up roughly the first 2 to 4 hours of playtime. If you're really beelining it, you can easily do it in an hour or so, especially if you're familiar. But for a new player, you're probably looking at a few hours here for everything that I just laid out. Now, from this point forward, with the foundation set, you're basically free to just do the loop that you're going to spend the bulk of the rest of your playtime doing. And that's going to look like this. You've got your base, you go in there, you prep, you get everything you need, you take the ammo that you want to bring with you for your weapons, you take some healing stuff, you take some gathering containers to get blood, which you will then turn into water. And once you have all of those things, you then head out into the environment. Along the way, you'll probably gather some resources for things that you want to craft in the future. You'll go to enemy points of interest, start clearing those out, killing all of the enemies, collecting the loot, looking for treasure and research points, and then you return to your base once your inventory is full, emptying out your bags, crafting any upgrades, replenishing your resources, and then heading back out again. And that is what you're going to do in this game. That is a loop. It is a survival crafting game with you going out, doing stuff, collecting resources, finding loot, going back to base, dropping everything, processing stuff, crafting stuff, refueling yourself, and then heading back out to do it again. And you do this as you're moving up tiers, progressing through the crafting system, going from the first tier of crafting to the second, making the tools that let you harvest the third, and that goes up and up and up as you move through the zones, as you extend through Haga Basin, eventually working your way into the endgame PvP. At least I presume that's how it continues, because again, this test was limited to the first 3 of 12 zones in Haga Basin, which I will add, I spent 40 hours playing, so that should give you a kind of an idea of what to expect in terms of the scale of this game, the amount of potential content, but I digress. So that is the basic loop. Now here are some of the things you're going to see and do in the process. First, let's talk about the points of of interest. Lots of varied POIs to check out here. You've got caves that are built into the sides of rock formations. You go in there, you collect some resources, there'll be a few enemies. You got shipwrecks. These are pre-existing locations in which you get a few harder enemies and some more valuable loot. One other interesting note about the shipwrecks is every single one of them is also fully PvP flagged, and this is one of those high risk, high reward situations where you will go there trying to get some good loot, but having to watch out for other players because anybody can kill you. Now, I will mention the space in this game is pretty big, and at least in the preview event, I only ever saw one other person there where I wasn't able to engage in PvP in the 40 hours that I played. They had 2 or 3 shipwrecks in total, and I only ever saw one person. I only ever got in a PvP fight one time. The space is big. If it really is only 40 people per the entire Haga Basin, the fact that the first 3 of the 12 zones of Haga Basin took me 40 hours to fully, thoroughly explore, and that I only ever saw one person in one of those shipwrecks to engage in PvP, this just could be a factor of the fact that this was a preview event and there were a limited amount of players, and we were playing on separate servers as well. It's really hard to judge how dense this world is going to feel once it's fully out, but I just, again, wanted to add and make note of that. Outside of the shipwrecks, you've got the Imperial testing stations. These are definitely one of my favorite things in the game. They are fully fleshed out underground dungeons, essentially, where you're going to have a lot of enemies, a lot of tougher enemies. Many of these even have a boss in them. Highly dense locations, lots of loot to find, and lots of valuable stuff. This is a great spot for getting your rare research schematics, which is how you craft better versions of the gear in whatever tier that you're currently in. Trading posts are these mini NPC encampments. Here you go to talk to various useful NPCs to collect contracts, which are essentially rotating side quests for you to complete, and you're going to often see other players here. This is also going to be where you can take an ornithopter from one trading post to another. You got these small enemy camps, which are scattered all about. They're basically like tiny little locations with typically 2 to 3 enemies. You've got the larger enemy outpost, and these are kind of like the Imperial testing stations, except above ground. They start off fairly small in the initial zone of Southern Haga Basin, but once you start to go even into the first 2 subsequent zones of the eastern and western side, these outposts start to get substantially bigger, and some of them are quite massive, even nearly as large as the underground testing stations. And then one other type of enemy point of interest we found were the mining facilities. As you might assume, this is a great place to get the various ores in the game, and it also has quite a few enemies and some valuable loot chests as well. There's also some dynamic events that take place that you're going to come across regularly. First of all, there is the sandworm, and essentially how this works is as you're going over the sands, either on foot or on your bike, after you make a certain amount of disruption or vibrations on the sands, eventually a sandworm emerges. Now, this seems to happen on a fairly regular basis. Once we got our sand bike, basically, if I was driving on the sands for anywhere north of 20 seconds, it would inevitably call a sandworm, and what happens is that they will emerge somewhere around you near where the sound and the vibrations are happening, and this is them physically bursting up, like going straight up into the air. You see them emerge, it makes a loud noise, and then they land, briefly submerging before coming back up and essentially beelining it straight towards you. Now, at that point, you need to get off the sands and get onto a rocky formation, because if the sandworm swallows you, that's it. Everything in your inventory, everything on your person, all of your weapons, everything on your hotbar, if the sandworm eats you, everything is gone. So you're on the sands, you're making noise, the worm emerges, it then goes down, and a couple of seconds later, it's basically just heading straight for you like a shark. Like you're stuck on train tracks and the train is it's coming straight at you. Once the worm emerges, get to the nearest rock formation as soon as possible. And it's pretty easy to tell where these are. You got the soft sands and dunes, and then once you start to see pebbles and rocks, that's where you're going to be safe. Besides the sandworm, we got ships regularly falling from the sky, and this is a really cool event. You're going to hear these things getting blasted. There's some war in space. I don't know. Some Dune stuff is happening up in the atmosphere, and these ships are up there flying around, and every so often they're going to get blasted with some artillery or something. You hear the thing pop, and then it comes hurtling down towards space, and it just crashes onto the sand dunes, and this creates a location where you can go to get some valuable resources. Presumably, every time we went there was nothing, but there might be a mechanic that we didn't figure out. I played 40 hours, and I couldn't figure out what the hell to do with these crashed ships, but apparently, when you go there, there's supposed to be a lot of valuable resources resources. We couldn't figure it out, but even just the whole, it's such a bombastic event. Literally, you got the ships flying up, you know, boom, 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 artillery, thing pops, comes curling down, crashes, and slides in the sand, and it's cool as hell, dude. And another thing that's cool as hell is these sandstorms that roll in. You're gonna get a warning when these are about to happen, but they're just basically gonna sweep across the zone, and you have to take cover. If you are out when the sandstorm is coming in, you're gonna take damage over time, and you will eventually die. The good thing is all you need is something over your head, even if it's just like the edge of a rock formation, or of course you can go inside of a building, you can make your way inside of caves, but the sandstorms roll through. I love seeing them coming towards you. They completely engulf everything, and you want to take cover once this happens. There's also a bunch of hazards all around, and these will be marked on your map as well as they're occurring. So you got the sandworm breaches. Whenever one of those worms emerge from the sands, that's going to be marked on your map. You got areas of quicksand. You got drum sand, where if you go over it, it makes a lot of noise. This calls the sandworms faster. There are radiation zones that are engulfed in fire. You got poison, and then you're also going to have hazard warnings on the game map whenever a sandstorm rolls through. As for the survival features, there are 4 meters that you have to keep track of. There's your hydration. You drink water, this goes up. You stay out in the sun too long, it goes down. You can't have it go all the way down to 0 because you start losing health. You got a stamina meter that constantly refills. It's just something to kind of mitigate your amount of sprinting or your amount of climbing. I should note the game has a full free climb system. You can literally climb anywhere and everywhere as long as you have the stamina to do so. This coupled with the grapple hook, you got free reign to pretty much go everywhere in the game. You can kind of scale your way up to the highest point. It's really, really cool. They do a good job. Also, after progressing through the crafting system, you are eventually going to unlock this power meter, and this is used to fuel your suspensor belt, which is like a glider through the air, as well as your shield. Again, both of which you unlock after, I think it took us like 10 to 15 hours before we had access to the suspensor belt and the overshield, but eventually you got it, and you have a power meter associated with it. And then finally, there's your health bar. Obviously, you want to keep it up. When it goes to 0, you die. Although the interesting addition of the overshield has this where when you have an overshield, you deflect 100% of any range damage, and this lasts until your power meter is drained. So essentially, once you get an overshield, your power meter almost becomes a second health bar, and then once the shield is dropped, it actually goes into the rest of your health. And then, of course, also along the survival lines is all of the gathering that is used to fuel your crafting. And as mentioned prior, this works in tiers that you're going to progress through. You start out by collecting brittle bushes and hydrating with the primrose and finding various types of fuel cells. And then eventually you're going to start gathering salvage metals, picking stones and copper ore. And then you work your way up to better versions of stones, to collecting better ores and crafting higher tier gear, eventually learning to harvest sand and spice as well. All of this is part of the core element of this game being a survival game. Now, progression through the crafting system is primarily done via research. So how this works is while you're out clearing enemy outposts, you're gonna find these tablets that once collected reward you research points, and then you spend those points to unlock the schematics for whatever it is you want. The entire list of the different craftable weapons, armor, consumables, the water stuff, the gathering crafting tools, the exploration items, the vehicles, everything, all of that is in your research tree. So you go to outpost, you kill enemies, you find and collect the intel, that gives you points. You spend those points in the research tree, which then lets you craft whatever stuff you're wanting to craft next. Simple as that. Let's talk about the skills and the combat system. So the combat is a mix of melee, ranged, and using your abilities. And I would say that the game does do a good job of incentivizing consistently using all three. You're not going to be only shooting or only meleeing. God, pray, hope you're not only meleeing or only using abilities. You're regularly going to be balancing all of these. So there are 5 classes in the game, and each of them come with 3 skill trees that are focused on different things. You get the 4 starter classes that you pick from. I mentioned those: the Trooper, the Mentat, the Bene Gesserit, and the Swordmaster. And then early on, you're going to find a trainer for the Planetologist, and he teaches you things about exploration and harvesting and gathering, and he's got 3 specific trees. Now, beyond having their starter skills, if it wasn't already made clear, every single one of those 4 classes that you're initially choosing from, they have 3 separate trees, and each of those trees focus on different things that kind of play into the theming. You pick your starter one, you get that first starter skill and access to that class's 3 trees. Then you go to a class trainer of the other classes that you want to learn skills for. You do a couple of quests for them, they give you access to the tree, and anytime you level up, you can spend points in the other trees. It's really completely up to you, and they have said eventually you can have access to everything. The limiting factor is you can only have so many active skills and so many passive skills active at any given time, but you can theoretically unlock it all and mix and match it whenever you please. So yeah, the trees include active abilities that you will cast on a cooldown, techniques that will modify the various active abilities, and some passives that just grant flat boost to various things across the board. Okay, so that is basically an overview of the game, everything that we saw, the various systems, features, and types of content. Now let's move on to my thoughts. Now, as I mentioned at the top, I do lean positive on this game while realizing that it definitely won't resonate with everyone, but for my particular interest, it gets enough things right that I have really enjoyed playing, and I'm very much so looking forward to the full release. So let's start off with the things that I enjoy, or the pros. Number one, the world building. It is 10 out of 10 in my opinion. I think they nailed this. The amount of atmosphere created is just through the roof. The environment itself, the various elements, the sandstorms, the worms erupting, the ships falling from the sky, the sound of gunfire off in the distance, whether that's NPCs or other real players, all of which enhanced by just some fantastic music. This is probably one of the most immersive survival games I've ever played. Very, very well built world. I've loved every minute spent in the game for this reason alone, and once again, it harkens back and reminds me so much of my time originally spent with The Division. First going through that game, I was similarly very immersed in that, and this gives me vibes along those lines. Also, in part due to how good the setting is, I have just loved exploring this world. The fact that it is one huge open space with zero loading or fast travel has made it very immersive. Going around, clearing a few camps, traversing a cave through a mountain, coming out the other side into this massive enemy stronghold, clearing everybody in there while searching for research points and looking for those rare, valuable treasure chests that have the purple schematics inside. All the while, you're gonna hear sandworms chasing players in the distance, the sound of the explosions in the sky followed by a ship plummeting to the ground and crashing in a massive boom. This is all part of the experience. It's constantly happening, and this is what I've loved so much. It's been so immersive. I've really enjoyed spending time in this game. Movement also feels fantastic. They nailed this as well. The grapple gun, also known as the Shigawara cable, combined with the grav belt, just results in some great mobility through the environment. You're going to often find yourself launching up and over things, carrying the momentum with you, and then using your grav bolt to fly along, heading straight towards an enemy, then shotgunning them in the face before you land. It's just a lot of fun. Moving through this world feels great because of the free climbing system, because of the Shigawara cable and the grav belt, all of those things combined. It's just great to traverse this space, even just on foot. I'll say that the survival portion of this game seems to strike a nice balance. It's not overly grindy, even while playing solo. Oftentimes I found that just going out for 5 to 10 minutes, gathering resources will give you enough to make whatever it is you need next, whether that's your next set of armor or weapons. And another thing that I love is how this game delivers on a very particular combination of genres that I personally really like. Fact is, this is one of the very few fully open world, multiplayer, MMO light, third-person shooter games. This is a genre mashup that I just love these games. Similar to the likes of Division, Defiance, or Firefall, there just aren't a lot of these, and I think it's a shame because I really enjoy them. All right, that is a bulk of what I really like about this game. Now let's move on to the cons. Combat, it's just not really good. Even as survival games go, this feels pretty flat. The melee is definitely the biggest offender. Now, I think part of this does have to do with the whole shield mechanic and how heavy attacks are replaced with slow attacks, because that's how you pierce shields in the Dune universe. They've got this whole thing where a lot of force won't pierce a shield, but if you go really slow, goes through the shield and it stabs the enemy, and they try representing that, but it just doesn't feel good from a gameplay perspective. And that's just one of the issues. I think the larger issue is that combat lacks any real sense of impact to it, even when you're slashing away, even when you're not doing the slow attack to pierce their shield, even when you're slashing, hacking, there's no impact there whatsoever. It's got that familiar feel of feeling like you're swinging and just catching air the entire time. Now, I will say the shooting I think is serviceable, but also could use weeks with some better feedback and sense of weight to it, but it is good enough that I still do enjoy playing the game, clearing strongholds and dungeons, especially again combined with the movement and the abilities that you have access to. But yeah, overall, I do think combat is a weak point of this game. I did have some slight performance issues. It was only really bad for me personally whenever the sandstorms came through, but when that did happen, I absolutely constantly got a drop in my game's performance. Frame rate would just tank until the sandstorm had passed. And that said, I have got a killer rig of a system, like top end CPU, GPU, memory, storage, everything. So I'm a little worried how this game is going to run on people with mid to low end PCs, because even I was having some issues. We also saw just a ton of bugs in our playtime. I was invisible for one of our friends for well over an hour. We were partied together. We were going through clearing camps. He literally could not see me. He could hear me moving around. He could hear me shooting. He could hear me looting, but he couldn't see me. And remember, this is a PvP game. So if my allies can't see me, even when we're partied up, presumably there could be scenarios where the enemies can't see me, and once the PvP starts to come incorporated into the game, that could be a big problem. There was also a period of time where one of my teammates literally just saw my character T-posing for multiple minutes straight. I was just sliding around T-posing the whole time. There were some things that wouldn't work properly, like for example, looting. There's an input for retrieve all whenever you're looting a container, a body, whatever. You can either interact with the items and pull them individually, or you can hold down this button and get everything at once, and that would just not function. Like I would hold down E, I think it was, I would hold down E, the bar would fill up, and the retrieving wouldn't happen, and I would do that multiple times, and it still wouldn't happen, so then I'd have to go in and pull everything out individually. At one point for me, the textures just stopped streaming in, and literally the entire game looked like a PlayStation 1 title. Everything was just flat in one color. It was actually hilarious, to be honest. There was also some instances of clipping through the terrain around the same time as my textures stopped working, and at one point, I unlocked what's basically your ultimate spice ability. It increases your damage, it lets you see enemies through walls, and that seeing enemies through walls and getting a health bar above their head, it just didn't go away. It was only supposed to last for the duration of the ultimate. I cast the ultimate, I get that ability, awesome, cool. The ultimate stops, and I can still see all the enemies through the walls. So that wasn't intended. I double checked, it wasn't intended, but it was happening. So again, some issues. The UI and user experience can be a bit convoluted and messy at times. I think the general game's UI, like the heads up display while you're just going around the world, gathering, exploring, and doing combat, I think this is fine, it looks decent, but I'm talking more about the user experience and the UI while engaging in the crafting and the base building. It's really convoluted. There's a ton of sub-menus and multiple clicks through all sorts of things and filtering through things, and just overall it feels a tad messy, just not very user-friendly, and that comes from someone who is quite experienced with survival games and convoluted UIs. I can also add that the game can feel very punishing at times. As mentioned, if you get eaten by the sandworm, you lose 100% of everything that you have on you, everything in your bags, all of your armor, your weapons, it's all gone, and I can imagine there might be some players who spend a few hours grinding up and getting a new set of gear and a brand new weapon. They go out onto the sand, the worm comes, it eats them, and then they see everything is gone and they just call it a wrap. I feel like that's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they get back-end data that expresses as much, because imagine spending a few hours grinding stuff, not knowing that if the worm eats you, you lose everything, getting eaten, losing everything, and being like, okay, see you later. So let's wrap it all up. As I mentioned earlier, Dune was pushed back from its original release date by a few weeks. It is now set to come out on June the 10th, or I guess June the 5th if you buy that early access edition. Now, no doubt them delaying the game was due to them wanting to continue to polish and bug fix it. God, I hope they bug fix, which of course they should, but also I still expect it's going to have some issues come launch with the amount of problems that we encountered in the most recent build we had access to. That said, I hope they get the game in as good a state as possible. Now, they do have a playtest on the horizon planned in the coming weeks here, and I would highly suggest jumping in for yourself once that is available to decide if this is a game that you think you're gonna like and be interested in paying for. Now, I will add, with everything said in this video, there is still a lot we haven't seen, which includes the entire mid to late game ranging from 30 to 100 hours. We had the first 3 of 12 zones. There are still 9 more zones in Haga Basin we didn't have access to, as well as the whole deep desert, which is supposed to be bigger than Haga Basin. The 2 major cities where players meet and socialize and trade, that wasn't in this preview. The deep desert wasn't here. That's where all the endgame takes place, the spice harvesting and the large-scale PvP. The system of Landsrod, which is an endgame mechanic where factions compete for control of neutral objectives, so think like zone control where the winner gets to decide new policies for the server. That sounds cool, but we didn't see it. The advanced vehicles like the ornithopters and sand buggies, the faction progression with faction-specific rewards, and the later game combat after we've unlocked multiple trees worth of active and passive skills, have access to more and different weapons, more gadgets, and complex enemies to fight. All of that wasn't here. For the most part, what I like about the game can only be improved with the addition of all of that stuff that we haven't seen. But also, what I don't like about the game and its problems won't much change with all that additional content. So make of that what you will. End of the day, the issues aside, I very much enjoyed my time playing this game, and I'm really looking forward to spending more time in the world. It is so immersive. I love this kind of niche subgenre of open world, third-person shooter, other players running around, lots of points of interest to explore, crafting progression. I love survival games. This is a mashup that really speaks to my personal interest, and all the issues aside, again, when weighting the scales of likes versus dislikes, I way more like it. Maybe quite a bit more. It's got a lot of problems, but I can put up with them because I like enough of what it's doing, but maybe you won't. I think a lot of people won't, but some of you will. Hey, there you go. That's how it is. All right, that's all for today. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. And yeah, I will be talking about and covering Dune more in the future. I might have a couple more videos leading up to release. We do have a beta test. I plan to jump back in and play some more and maybe expand upon my thoughts after that experience. I'm hoping the servers feel more full because the fact that I only had 1 PvP encounter and 40 freaking hours of playing the game, I wanted more. But anyways, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.